In the heart of a busy airport, a decorated veteran steps into a world of luxury for the first time. His first-class ticket, a small reward for years of sacrifice. But when a gatekeeper judges him by his modest appearance, he's cast aside with words that cut deeper than any wound. What they don't know is that this quiet man carries more than just his past. He carries the power to change their future. By the end of the day, a lesson in respect and humanity will leave everyone stunned. The low hum of the airport echoed around Robert White as he stood in line at the check-in counter, clutching his worn leather bag tightly. His other hand rested instinctively on the small lapel of his jacket, adorned with a single silver pin, his Purple Heart. It wasn't flashy, just a quiet symbol of a man who had given everything for his country and expected little in return. Robert had always been modest, almost to a fault. After retiring from the military, he worked as a mechanic, saving every spare dollar for moments like this, a trip to see his daughter graduate from law school. It was a dream he had nurtured for years, and today, he was finally flying first class. The thought made him smile, a rare indulgence for Robert. The idea of luxury wasn't about extravagance. It was about finally rewarding himself for years of hard work and sacrifice. Boarding first class felt like stepping into a world he had only seen from a distance, one that whispered promises of comfort and dignity. He approached the counter, sliding his ticket and ID toward the gate agent, a young woman with kind eyes. Glanced at his paperwork and smiled. "Thank you for your service, Mr. White," she said, handing back his documents. "Enjoy your flight." The warmth in her voice settled some of his nerves. He nodded politely and made his way to the security checkpoint. The airport was a hive of activity, with travelers rushing to their gates, announcements blaring overhead, and the distinct scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. Robert moved with the steady precision of a man who had navigated far more chaotic terrains. He kept to himself, observing the hurried pace of those around him, and finally found his way to the exclusive first-class lounge. The lounge doors were sleek and intimidating, a polished barrier between Robert and a world he'd never known. He hesitated for a moment, adjusting his jacket and smoothing the creases in his pants. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, a tall man with graying hair, his face weathered by time and hardship, but still strong. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The lounge was as luxurious as he had imagined. Soft leather chairs were arranged in cozy clusters, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of planes taxiing on the runway. A soft murmur of conversation floated in the air, accompanied by the clinking of fine china and the occasional rustle of newspapers. Robert approached the reception desk, where a uniformed attendant greeted him. "Good afternoon. May I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over with a slight smile. "First time here," he said, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of awe. The attendant returned his smile. "Welcome to the first-class lounge, Mr. White. Please make yourself comfortable. Let us know if you need anything." Relieved, Robert found a seat near the window. He set his bag down and allowed himself a moment to soak in the atmosphere. It was everything he'd imagined and more, tranquil, refined, and far removed from the chaos of the main terminal. He glanced around, noticing the other passengers. Most were dressed in suits or designer outfits, their movements exuding the effortless confidence of people accustomed to privilege. For a brief moment, Robert felt out of place, but then he reminded himself he had earned this. As Robert settled into his seat, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up to see a man in a crisp uniform, his expression stern and unwelcoming. "Excuse me, sir," the man said curtly. "Are you in the right place?" Robert frowned slightly, unsure of the question. "Yes, I believe so." I showed my ticket at the desk. The man, whose name tag read Baker, arched an eyebrow and crossed his arms. "First class, that's correct?" Robert replied, his tone calm but firm. Baker scrutinized him for a moment, his gaze lingering on Robert's modest attire and the scuffed edges of his bag. It was clear he didn't believe him. "I'll need to see your ticket again," Baker demanded, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. Robert reached into his pocket and handed over the boarding pass without hesitation. Baker snatched it, examining it as though expecting to find a mistake. When none appeared, his lips tightened into a thin line. "Wait here," he barked, disappearing toward the reception desk. Robert sat back, feeling the weight of eyes on him. A murmur of whispers rippled through the lounge, and he could sense the judgment in their stares. He straightened his back, refusing to let their assumptions diminish him. Years of military discipline had taught him to endure far worse. Baker returned a few minutes later, his expression smug. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket, Mr. White," he said. "It doesn't appear to be valid for the lounge." "That's not possible," Robert replied, his voice steady. "I purchased this ticket a week ago. It's for first class." Baker smirked, leaning in closer. "First class isn't for everyone, sir. Perhaps you misunderstood." The insinuation hung in the air like a slap. Robert felt a rush of anger but suppressed it, meeting Baker's gaze with unflinching resolve. "I know exactly what I purchased," Robert said evenly. "If there's an issue, I suggest you double-check your system." Baker's smirk faltered, but he didn't back down. Instead, he raised his voice. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The lounge fell silent, all eyes on Robert. He stood slowly, towering over Baker but maintaining his composure. "I'll leave," he said quietly, "but you're making a mistake." He picked up his bag and walked toward the exit, his steps measured and dignified. The whispers followed him, but he didn't look back. As the lounge doors closed behind him, Robert felt the sting of humiliation but refused to let it break him. He found a quiet corner of the terminal and sat down, staring out at the planes. He thought about his daughter and her accomplishments, letting the pride he felt for her steady his heart. Little did he know, someone else had been watching the entire encounter, a woman who would soon change everything. The air in the lounge was thick with tension, even after Robert had left. Susan Lewis sat a few rows away, her sharp eyes scanning the room, noting every reaction. Though dressed casually in a tailored blazer and jeans, she carried an aura of authority. Most of the lounge staff wouldn't have guessed she was Susan Lewis, the chief operating officer of Skylark Airlines. Susan had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, often unnoticed in her early days, a trait she now used to her advantage. Today's visit was meant to observe employee behavior, evaluate customer service, and ensure the airline's values were upheld. What she had just witnessed was far from acceptable. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair as she replayed the scene, the veteran's quiet dignity, the condescension dripping from Baker's tone, and the judgmental glances of the other passengers. It all sat uneasily in her chest. Susan turned her attention to the reception desk. Baker stood there, whispering something to another staff member, his smirk unwavering. She watched as he dismissed the conversation with a wave of his hand and strutted back into the lounge like he owned the place. She couldn't let this go. Susan rose from her seat and approached the reception desk. The young woman behind it, whose name tag read Sarah, looked up nervously. "Excuse me," Susan said, her tone calm but firm. "I couldn't help but notice what just happened with that gentleman, the one in the suit." Sarah hesitated, glancing around as though worried someone might overhear. I'm not sure what you mean," she stammered. "You know exactly what I mean," Susan replied, softening her voice. "I saw the way Baker treated him. Was his ticket valid or not?" Sarah looked down, fiddling with a pen. "It was valid," she admitted quietly. "First class, fully paid." Susan's jaw tightened. Then why wasn't he allowed to stay? Sarah glanced at Baker, who was now speaking loudly to another passenger. "Baker, he has a way of deciding who he thinks belongs here." "I'm sorry, I should have said something." "You should have," Susan agreed. "But I understand why you didn't." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at Susan's tone, sensing she wasn't just another passenger. Susan leaned in closer. "I need you to print out the record for that man's ticket. His name is Robert White." Sarah nodded quickly, tapping on her keyboard. Moments later, she handed Susan a printed slip. Susan folded it neatly and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll handle it from here." Susan left the lounge and scanned the terminal until she spotted Robert, sitting near a window. He was staring out at the planes, his back straight, his hands resting on his lap. Despite the humiliation he'd endured, he held himself with a quiet strength that moved Susan deeply. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Mr. White." Robert turned, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of curiosity and weariness. "Yes. May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the seat next to him. He nodded. "Of course." Susan sat down and extended her hand. "My name is Susan Lewis. I'm with Skylark Airlines." Robert's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he shook her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Lewis. I wanted to apologize for what happened back there," she said. "It was unacceptable." Robert studied her face for a moment, then shook his head. You don't need to apologize. You weren't the one who did it. No, she admitted. But I am responsible for what happens on this airline. Robert looked away, his gaze returning to the planes. I've dealt with worse, Miss Lewis. People see a black man in a modest suit and assume he doesn't belong. That's not new. Her chest tightened at his words. You shouldn't have to deal with it here, not on my watch. Robert didn't respond right away. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but heavy. I bought that ticket to celebrate my daughter. She's graduating law school next week, first in our family to make it that far. I thought I'd treat myself, just this once. Susan felt a lump rise in her throat. Your daughter must be very proud of you. She is, Robert said, a small smile breaking through. But it's hard not to think about how things like this will affect her. She'll face the same judgments, the same obstacles. Sometimes, I wonder if my service made any difference at all. It did, Susan said firmly, and it still does. Susan pulled out the printed ticket record from her pocket and handed it to Robert. I checked your ticket. Everything is in order. You have every right to be in that lounge. Robert glanced at the paper, then back at her. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I want to go back. You won't have to, Susan assured him, but Baker will answer for what he did. Robert raised an eyebrow. You're going to fire him? Not just yet, Susan said, a hint of steel in her voice. First, he's going to learn what it means to respect someone like you. Robert studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'd like to see that. You will, Susan promised. And when you do, I hope you'll let me make this right for you. Robert's smile returned, faint but genuine. All right, Miss Lewis. Let's see what you've got. Susan stood, offering her hand again. Thank you, Mr. White, and thank you for your service. This time, Robert's handshake was firmer, his grip steady. As she walked away, Susan felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would make this right, not just for Robert, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong. She returned to the lounge, ready to set her plan into motion. The lounge was quieter than before when Susan Lewis re-entered, but the tension still lingered, like an unspoken secret. Baker was at his usual post near the reception desk, chatting with another staff member, his confidence as unshakable as ever. Susan's gaze hardened as she approached him, her steps purposeful. Baker noticed her and straightened, assuming she was just another passenger. Can I help you? He asked, his voice clipped but polite enough. You can, Susan replied, her tone calm yet sharp. I'd like to speak with you privately now. There was something in her demeanor that gave him pause. Baker glanced at the other staff member, then nodded. All right, this way. Baker led Susan into a small office at the back of the lounge. The walls were plain, adorned with framed photos of the airline's history, and a desk sat in the center, cluttered with papers and pens. Baker leaned against the desk, arms crossed. What's this about? He asked, his tone shifting to one of impatience. Susan didn't waste time. I'm Susan Lewis, Chief Operating Officer of Skylark Airlines. The color drained from Baker's face. Oh, I didn't realize. No, you didn't, Susan interrupted, her voice icy. If you had, I doubt you would have handled that situation with Mr. W so disgracefully. Baker opened his mouth to speak, but Susan held up a hand. Let me be clear, what I saw was blatant discrimination, unprofessional conduct, and an utter failure to uphold the values of this airline. Ma'am, Baker stammered. I wasn't trying to discriminate. I thought his ticket was suspicious. Suspicious. Susan repeated, her tone cutting. Because he didn't fit your preconceived image of a first-class passenger? Because he's a black man in a modest suit? Baker looked down, his confidence crumbling under Susan's glare. I didn't mean it like that. But that's exactly how it came across, Susan snapped. And it wasn't just him who noticed. Other passengers saw your behavior. Do you have any idea how much damage incidents like this can do to our reputation? To say nothing of the personal humiliation you caused a man who served this country. I made a mistake, Baker said quickly. I know, I'll apologize to him. I'll make it right. You will, Susan said, her voice steely, but not just with an apology. Susan called Sarah into the office and instructed her to gather the lounge staff. Baker's face turned pale, but he didn't argue. Within minutes, the staff was assembled in the main lounge area, standing awkwardly near the reception desk. Passengers watched with mild curiosity, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Robert White, still sitting in the terminal, noticed the commotion and felt a tug of unease. He hesitated, then stood and made his way back toward the lounge, keeping to the periphery. Susan stepped forward, her posture commanding. She addressed the staff first, her voice loud enough for everyone in the lounge to hear. This morning, a passenger, Mr. Robert White, was denied access to this lounge, despite holding a valid first-class ticket. The reason? Discrimination, based on appearance and unfounded assumptions about his worthiness to be here. The room fell silent. Baker shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mr. White is a decorated war veteran who has given more to this country than most of us can imagine, Susan continued. And today he was treated with disrespect and humiliation by someone who should have been upholding our values of inclusivity and excellence. Susan turned to Baker, her expression unyielding. Baker, you will now address Mr. White directly. At that moment, Robert stepped into the lounge. All eyes turned to him as he approached, his back straight, his face impassive. Baker swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Mr. White, Baker began, his voice trembling. I want to apologize. I misjudged you, and I acted unfairly. It was wrong of me to question your ticket and to treat you the way I did. I'm sorry for the humiliation I caused you. Robert studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. Apology accepted, he said simply. Baker exhaled, but Susan wasn't done. This apology is just the beginning, Susan said, her tone firm. From today, Skylark Airlines will be implementing a new training program to ensure this never happens again. Every employee, including management, will be required to participate in cultural sensitivity and customer service workshops. She turned to Robert, her expression softening. Mr. White, we owe you more than an apology. Your experience today has revealed shortcomings in our organization that we are committed to addressing. Susan gestured to a nearby staff member, who stepped forward with a sleek black envelope. As a token of our gratitude for your service and our regret for how you were treated, Skylark Airlines would like to offer you a lifetime first-class membership. Any flight, any time, your seat is guaranteed. A murmur rippled through the lounge as Robert accepted the envelope. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. Thank you, he said finally, his voice steady but thick with emotion. This means a lot. Susan smiled. It's the least we can do, and if you ever experience anything less than the best from us again, I want you to call me directly. She handed him her business card. As the lounge returned to its usual hum of activity, Robert sat near the window again, his confidence restored. A flight attendant approached him with a cup of coffee and a warm smile, ensuring he was comfortable. Susan watched from a distance, satisfied but reflective. This wasn't just about righting a wrong. It was about setting a precedent. People like Robert deserved not just respect, but recognition for their contributions and their dignity. Before boarding his flight, Robert approached Susan one last time. You didn't have to do all this, he said, but I'm glad you did. It gives me hope that things can change. They can, Susan replied, but it starts with people like you, reminding us what really matters. As Robert boarded the plane, Susan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Change wasn't easy, but today, it felt possible. The plane soared high above the clouds, carrying Robert White toward his destination. He sat in his first-class seat, feeling the soft leather beneath him, the quiet hum of the engines a soothing backdrop. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to relax. His thoughts drifted to his daughter, imagining the proud smile that would light up her face when he surprised her at her graduation. But the events of the morning still lingered in his mind. Robert had faced many challenges in his life, yet the sting of being judged for his appearance had never grown dull. It was a pain that carried the weight of countless unspoken stories, of doors closed, of assumptions made, of dignity questioned. Yet today, something had shifted, not just for him, but for others like him. Back at Skylark Airlines, Susan Lewis sat at her desk, the glow of her office's floor-to-ceiling windows casting a soft light on her papers. She was reviewing the immediate steps she had outlined to address the incident. Cultural sensitivity training was just the beginning, but Susan knew the problem ran deeper than one incident or one employee. She leaned back in her chair, the faint hum of the city below filling the silence. A photo on her desk caught her eye. It was of her father, a retired civil rights lawyer who had always championed equality and injustice. Susan thought about the values he had instilled in her, the courage to confront injustice, the empathy to understand others' struggles, and the resolve to create meaningful change. Her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Miss Lewis, the staff compliance report you requested is ready." "Thank you, Carla. Please leave it on the desk," Susan replied, offering a distracted smile. As the door closed, Susan opened the report. It detailed employee conduct patterns, customer feedback, and areas for improvement. Unsurprisingly, Baker's name appeared multiple times under complaints, including several incidents flagged as minor misconduct. Susan frowned. It was clear this wasn't an isolated case. She picked up the phone and dialed Human Resources. "I want a full review of Baker's employment history on my desk by the end of the day," she said. "And let's move forward with his suspension, pending investigation." "Yes, ma'am," came the prompt reply. Susan hung up, feeling a mix of satisfaction and determination. Baker's behavior wasn't just about poor judgment. It was emblematic of a culture that needed to be dismantled. She wouldn't stop until every employee understood that dignity and respect weren't just words, they were non-negotiable. As Robert's plane descended, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their approach to the destination. Robert stared out the window, watching the landscape below come into focus. It wasn't just the city skyline he saw. It was the culmination of a journey he had started long ago. He thought about his daughter, Sarah, and the sacrifices he had made to ensure her success. When his wife passed away years ago, it had been just the two of them against the world. Robert had worked double shifts, taking on grueling jobs to keep food on the table and pay for Sarah's education. She had never let him down, and he had vowed to never let her down either. As the plane touched down, Robert felt a swell of pride. He wasn't just arriving to celebrate her achievements. He was arriving as a man who had reclaimed his dignity, refusing to let anyone define his worth. The airport was bustling as Robert made his way through the terminal. He carried his bag with ease, his military precision still evident in his stride. He spotted Sarah near the exit, her face lighting up as she saw him. "Dad," she exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace him. Robert hugged her tightly, his voice warm. "There's my graduate." Sarah pulled back, her eyes shining with joy. "You made it. I was so worried about your flight." "It was an experience," Robert said with a chuckle, his words carrying more weight than he let on. "But I'm here, and that's all that matters." Sarah linked her arm with his as they headed toward the car. "You deserve this, Dad, after everything you've done for me." Robert smiled, his heart full. "You're the one who deserves it, sweetheart. You've worked so hard, and I couldn't be prouder." As they drove through the city, Robert recounted parts of his journey, the flight, the lounge incident, and Susan Lewis's intervention. Sarah listened intently, her admiration for her father growing with every word. "Dad," she said softly, "you're not just a hero because of your service. You're a hero because you never let the world take away your spirit." Robert glanced at her, his chest tightening with emotion. "That's because I had you to remind me what's worth fighting for." Back at Skylark Airlines, the changes Susan had initiated were beginning to take shape. Employee training sessions were scheduled, internal reviews were underway, and new policies were being drafted to ensure inclusivity and respect became pillars of the company culture. Baker, meanwhile, had been suspended pending further investigation. The incident with Robert had sparked discussions among staff, many of whom began to reflect on their own biases and behaviors. Susan made it clear the goal wasn't just punishment, it was transformation. In the weeks that followed, Robert's story spread quietly among the airline staff, becoming a powerful reminder of the importance of respect and humility. Susan ensured his example was woven into the training sessions, emphasizing the lesson that every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance. As Robert sat in Sarah's apartment that evening, surrounded by family photos and the warmth of her achievements, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. His daughter's success was a testament to the sacrifices he had made, and his own journey had been vindicated in ways he hadn't expected. Across the city, Susan sat in her office, reviewing the final draft of Skylark's new inclusivity policy. She thought about Robert, his quiet strength, and the change his story had sparked. She knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time, she felt the winds of change beginning to blow. And in that shared moment, separated by distance but united by purpose, both Robert and Susan knew that dignity, once reclaimed, had the power to transform not just individuals, but entire systems. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Skylark Airlines headquarters, casting long shadows across Susan Lewis's desk. Stacks of papers and reports were scattered in meticulous chaos, each one a piece of the change she had set in motion. For Susan, today was critical. It marked the beginning of the first round of training sessions she had mandated for all Skylark employees. As she reviewed her agenda, her assistant, Carla, entered with a quiet knock. "Miss Lewis, Baker is waiting in the conference room." Susan glanced at the clock. It was earlier than she had expected. "Send him in." Carla hesitated. "He looks nervous." Susan allowed a faint smile to tug at the corners of her lips. "Good, it's about time." Baker stepped into the room, his usual confidence replaced by a visible unease. His shoulders were tense, and his eyes darted around as though searching for an escape route. Susan gestured for him to take a seat. "Baker," she began, her voice even. "Do you know why I asked you to meet me today?" He swallowed hard, nodding. "I assume it's about Mr. White." "It is," Susan confirmed. "But it's also about more than that. Your behavior during that incident was unacceptable, but it's part of a pattern we've identified. This isn't the first time you've been flagged for unprofessional conduct." Baker's face reddened. "I didn't mean to cause any harm." "Intentions don't matter as much as impact," Susan interrupted, her tone sharp but controlled. "You humiliated a paying customer, a veteran no less, because you assumed he didn't belong. And the truth is, that assumption comes from a place of bias." Baker opened his mouth to protest, but Susan held up a hand. "I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to help you understand the consequences of your actions and give you a chance to do better." He looked at her, a mixture of shame and defiance in his eyes. "So what happens now?" "You're being placed on probation," Susan said firmly. "During this time, you'll participate in mandatory training sessions, and your performance will be closely monitored. Consider this your opportunity to prove that you're willing to grow." Baker nodded reluctantly, his pride clearly bruised. "I understand." "Good," Susan said, leaning forward. "Because if I see even a hint of this behavior again, your career here is over. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Susan's expression softened slightly. "This isn't just about your job, Baker. It's about the kind of person you want to be. Take this seriously." As he left the room, Susan hoped her words would resonate. Redemption was possible, but it required a willingness to confront one's own flaws. Whether Baker was ready to do that remained to be seen. Meanwhile, Robert W.'s week had been filled with joy and pride. His daughter Sarah's graduation had been a moving ceremony, and the two had spent countless hours reminiscing and celebrating. But as the weekend approached, Robert received an unexpected call from Skylark Airlines. "Mr. White," a voice said on the other end of the line, "we'd like to formally invite you to our headquarters. Miss Lewis would like to meet with you again and share some updates." Robert was hesitant at first, unsure if he wanted to relive the events at the airport, but curiosity won out, and he agreed to the visit. When Robert arrived at Skylark's headquarters, he was greeted warmly by Susan herself. She led him through the sleek, modern building, explaining the changes that had been implemented since their encounter. In a conference room filled with Skylark employees, Robert was introduced as a guest of honor. Susan stood beside him, addressing the staff. "Mr. White's experience was a wake-up call for us," she began. "It highlighted the importance of respect, empathy, and accountability in everything we do. Today, we're here to listen and learn from him." Robert stepped forward, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I faced my share of challenges," he said, his voice steady. "But what I want to talk about today isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what happens to countless others who are judged before they even have a chance to prove themselves." He shared stories from his military days, times when he had fought alongside people from all walks of life. In the field, it didn't matter what someone looked like or where they came from. What mattered was their character and their actions. As he spoke, Robert noticed the expressions of the staff shift from curiosity to understanding, and in some cases, to shame. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. After the session, Susan and Maris sat together in her office. She handed him a small plaque with Skylark's new mission statement engraved on it. "This is thanks to you," she said. "Your story reminded us of what we should stand for." Robert smiled, running his fingers over the words. "I appreciate that, Miss Lewis, but this isn't just my story. It's about all the people who deserve better. And they'll get it," Susan promised, "starting here." As Robert left the building, he felt a sense of fulfillment. His journey had been a difficult one, but today, he had seen the impact of his resilience. Change was slow, but it was possible. And sometimes, it only took one voice to start the ripple. The drive home felt lighter for Robert White than it had in years. The weight of that morning at the airport, the sting of judgment, and even the memories of battles fought, both abroad and at home, seemed to have softened into something else. A quiet triumph. He glanced at the small plaque Susan Lewis had given him, resting carefully on the passenger seat. It wasn't about accolades. It was about recognition, about being seen. Sarah was waiting at the door when Robert pulled up to her apartment. "How was the meeting, Dad?" she asked, taking his bag as he stepped inside. Robert chuckled softly. "It was different, good, but different." Sarah led him to the couch, her curiosity evident. "Tell me everything." As Robert recounted the day, he noticed the way Sarah's expression shifted from pride to frustration and back again. "I can't believe that man, Baker," she said, crossing her arms. "Heck, lucky Miss Lewis didn't fire him on the spot." "People make mistakes," Robert said simply. "What matters is whether they're willing to fix them." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "You're always so forgiving, Dad. How do you do that?" Robert leaned back, his gaze distant. "When you've been through what I've been through, Sarah, you learn that anger can only carry you so far. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It's how you move forward." Sarah nodded slowly, her respect for her father deepening. "I wish more people thought like you." A few days later, Robert was at a local coffee shop, enjoying a quiet moment with his newspaper, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Mr. White." He turned to see Baker standing there, his posture less confident than before. Robert raised an eyebrow, but gestured for him to sit. "I didn't expect to see you here," Robert said, folding his newspaper. "I wasn't sure if I should approach you," Baker admitted, his voice hesitant. "But after everything that happened, I felt like I owed you more than just an apology." Robert studied the younger man, noting the genuine remorse in his eyes. "I'm listening." Baker took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day, and honestly, I've realized how blind I've been to my own biases. I've always told myself I was fair, but now I see how much I let my assumptions cloud my judgment." Robert nodded but didn't speak, allowing Baker to continue. "I know it's not your job to forgive me or to help me fix this," Baker said, "but I wanted you to know that I'm taking the training seriously, and more than that, I want to do better outside of work too." The sincerity in Baker's tone struck a chord in Robert. He leaned forward, his voice steady but kind. "Acknowledging where you went wrong is a start, Baker, but it's what you do next that matters." Baker nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thank you, Mr. White, for giving me the chance to say this." At Skylar Airlines, Susan Lewis was deep in the throes of implementing her changes. The first round of training sessions had been a success, and early feedback from employees was promising, but Susan wasn't content to stop there. She had gathered her leadership team for a meeting. The energy in the room was focused and determined. "This isn't just about avoiding bad press," she said, pacing in front of a projector screen. "This is about setting a new standard for how we treat our customers and each other." Her team nodded, taking notes as she outlined her vision for the company. "We're going to expand our training programs, include mentorship opportunities for employees from underrepresented backgrounds, and create a culture where speaking up is not just encouraged, it's expected." One of her senior managers raised a hand. "Do you think these changes will really stick?" Susan paused, her gaze steady. "They will if we make them part of who we are. This isn't a one-time fix, it's a commitment." As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Robert White's story began to ripple outward. Skylark Airlines became known not just for its luxury, but for its inclusivity and commitment to respect. Passengers noticed the difference, and employee morale began to improve as the culture shifted. Robert, meanwhile, returned to his quiet life, content in the knowledge that his experience had sparked change. He continued to travel occasionally, always greeted warmly by Skylark staff, who now recognized him as more than just a customer. One crisp autumn morning, Robert sat on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He watched as the leaves fell, their vibrant colors swirling in the breeze. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, not just the flight, but a lifetime of lessons, hardships, and triumphs. Sarah joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Thinking about something?" "Just life," Robert replied with a smile. "How far we've come." Sarah nodded, her gaze following the falling leaves. "You've taught me so much, Dad, not just about perseverance, but about grace." Robert reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's all we can hope for, Sarah, to live in a way that leaves the world a little better than we found it." As the sun rose higher, warming the cool morning air, Robert felt a sense of peace. His story had been one of resilience and quiet strength, and in its wake, it had planted seeds of change that would continue to grow.